affecting the distribution of work rather than the overall quantity. I think we can be fairly confident that almost under any foreseeable scenario for the next 10, 20 years, we're going to have a very large number of jobs in our economy in low-paying sectors, often called low-skill jobs. It's a given that we're going to see a big growth in the number of people caring, particularly for the elderly in our economy, but I think we're going to see a growth in leisure sector, if you like, related jobs, personal services and so on. There have been some quite rapid change in some sectors, but actually the thing that I'm generally struck by is that change has been slower than I would have thought it had been. I'm kind of surprised we haven't seen more change, given the fact that machines are so much more powerful than they were 5 years ago, never mind 25 years ago. So in some ways our economies actually are more sluggish to adapt, I think, to frontier innovations than we might think.
Do you think, for example, the American economy is quicker to adapt?
First of all, I think the American public debate is quicker to pick up in some of these things than the British one, and I think the American public debate tends to be more framed by technologists and futurologists, whereas we tend to be more framed, if you like, by dismal economists. I also think, a different point, that America is just more successful at taking new innovation into kind of relatively mainstream production than we have been in the UK.
If the machines become fantastically cheap, they might change that debate.
Yeah, I've yet to see the machine which is going to cut someone's hair or look after my or your mum. That's kind of where a lot of these jobs are at. Now, maybe one day, but I think that day is an awful long way down the road, and I think there will be a lot of resistance to that.
I wonder if the rest of us, economists, journalists, lawyers, are all going to be rushing for those jobs.
What, to be hairdressers and carers? Yeah, I think that's a way off too.
In fact, in Japan, robots are already looking after old people. And Panasonic is experimenting with machines that, if they don't actually cut your hair, at least wash it.
Here the robot is applying shampoo. The shampoo is lathered inside the machine, which means it only needs a small amount to wash the entire head.
And this summer, a hotel opens in Nagasaki, staffed entirely by robots. But even if machines don't move into these areas in the foreseeable future, the advance of technology in the world of work does pose an important question. What is work for? Maybe a lot of it is just killing time. Federico Pistono is looking forward to the time when machines do all the drudgery of work so we can get on with the business of living. The subtitle of his book, Why Robots Will Steal Your Job, is But That's Okay. Do you think we need jobs in the future?
I think we need some jobs, but I don't think we need as many jobs as we like to think we do. I think we could accomplish actually far more than we do if we recognize that we should decouple income and employment. I think we are not really planning for society. We are kind of just going along with it and see what happens. So if we really asked ourselves the question, like, what is society for? Like, why do we do stuff? We haven't asked ourselves, what is the purpose of, for example, work? I mean, it should be to increase your standard of living so you can do the things you like. You can spend time with your family. It seems to me that we are kind of working for the sake of making money so we can buy stuff. We should have a big public discussion about this topic.
In fact, technology already seems to be decoupling labour and income. Last year, we collectively spent nearly 500 million hours each day updating Facebook. That's 25 times the amount of labour that it took to build the Panama Canal. And we did it all for free. And as thinkers like Thomas Piketty have argued, money seems to be gravitating away from workers to the owners of capital. And today, capital is more and more technology itself. While we were all contributing for free, Facebook made a profit of nearly $3 billion. So what effect will this have on capitalism, which seems to have at its heart the exchange of labour for money? Andrew McAfee again.
I believe the main challenge of that is that most of us get our money to acquire all these delightful goods and services by offering our labor to the economy. And as technology can do more and more, that labor becomes less and less valuable.
David Graeber is Professor of Anthropology at the London School of Economics and widely seen as the intellectual mind behind the Occupy movement. You may have already heard him on the radio this week, deconstructing debt.
I think what happened in the 60s and 70s is that a lot of capitalists thought, oh my God, Marx was right, when Marx said that you could only make profit off human labor. That was his prediction, that gradually technology would make capitalism less and less profitable because you can't actually exploit a machine. Now it's starting to happen. Will capitalism survive? I suspect not. So it strikes me that we are going to move to something else. I am a long-term thinker, and one of my greatest worries is whatever the next thing is going to be even worse. It could be some new form of feudalism or fascism or techno-fascism of some kind. That could easily happen.
This is scary stuff. Our clever advances in technology might be destroying not just jobs, but the possibility of jobs, or certainly jobs that might enable us to make a living. But not everyone is so dystopian. Pippa Malmgren was one of George W. Bush's economic advisors and now works as a financial consultant. She thinks technology will save us rather than condemn us to a world ruled by machines. In fact, she likes technology so much, she's set up a robotics company of her own.
A friend of mine said, well, actually, I have this idea about building drones for commercial purposes. Things like surveying farmland and surveying buildings and news collection. And I said, fabulous, how wonderful. And so together we collaborated and we created a company, H Robotics.
What kind of work are these drones going to be doing?
Look at property surveyors. Right now, the usual approach is there's a guy on the ground with a pair of expensive binoculars. So now people are going to have a chance to use these drones to fly right up to the top of the building, get very close, have a good look at exactly what's going on.
And won't that put surveyors out of work? Well, no, though they'll have to sharpen their drone flying skills.
You still need a person to fly these things. They're just going to be better equipped with the drone than they are with binoculars. I'm very optimistic about the job-creating capability of new technology. So I think that for every robot you deploy, you actually create jobs. It probably creates something like 3 or 4 jobs for every new machine.
But how do we know they're going to create 4 new jobs for each one?
I think it's literally a range of opinion that's not provable. We probably won't know for another decade. All I know is from my work in the field, what I see is more and more people being hired into companies that are engaged in the creation of robotics. There's just no way to prove it yet. But I think that we're going to find that, like all technological innovation, you end up creating more opportunities ultimately than destroying them.
Okay. So we need more people to build the drones. But once they're up and flying, surely those surveyors that use them will be able to get their work done more quickly, putting other surveyors out of business. There can't be that many buildings to survey. So what will they do when they join the lawyers, doctors and journalists who have found their jobs being taken over by computers? The arts, perhaps?
I think we're all going to innovate and we're all going to change. We're going to learn how to use these machines and make ourselves more productive and more effective. My personal view is that a robot will never be able to engage in creativity. It can just follow an algorithm that a human being has designed and given it. Therefore, it can't make creative leaps. And this is where real innovation comes from the creativity of the human mind. And I just don't think we should underestimate that.
It's a nice idea. While robots are doing all the drudge work, we can be writing novels, putting on plays and composing music. But don't be so sure. This setting, for soprano and piano, of Percy Shelley's poem Mutability, was composed not by a human, but by a computer called Veamos at the University of Malaga. It may not be to everyone's taste, but you know what? I feel I've heard a lot worse. And if a computer can do this now, what will it be capable of in, say, 10 years' time? The challenge for us now is how we can prepare for a world where machines compose music, cut our hair, and who knows, arbitrate our legal disputes. One thing's for sure. We're going to need to change the way we think about education and careers. Those reliable middle-class routes to prosperity, including law and medicine, may not be so lucrative anymore. Lawyer Gregor Pryor.
From a personal perspective, it's been incredibly fun for me to be a lawyer. If we're talking about job security, I'm not sure I would recommend for people to go into the law if their working assumption is that it's a safe, stable, unchallenged environment. I think, like every other aspect of business these days, I don't think there is such a thing as job security in many areas, and I think the law is no different now.
What would you recommend parents to send their kids into?
MIT followed by some kind of incubator or startup, probably. I mean, that's where the real money is these days.
And for those of us who might not quite make the grade for MIT, Andrew McAfee, who was one of the first to warn of this job-destroying nature of today's technology, thinks it's time to bring back the fun into education.
Like you can imagine, we get asked this question about how should I prepare my children all the time. So when I talk to parents of young children and they say, what trajectory do we put our kids on? The advice I give is to send them off to I went to a Montessori school, send them off to some fairly open, kind of hippie flavor of education that teaches them that the world is a really interesting place. And their job is to go poke at it, try to understand it better, just kind of play around in the world.
But perhaps the most radical suggestion comes from Pippa Malmgren. She wants us to go back to the workshop.
What we really need to do is to put what we Americans call shop class, or you might call vocational training, back into schools. That's when you're 12, 13, 14 years old and you learn how to weld metal, how to sew, how to make an engine go. You know how plumbing actually operates. We've had 20 or 30 years of a software revolution with silicon chips and the capacity of computers to do more and more. But what we're getting now is a hardware revolution. I think now that I'm in the robotics business, I would rather hire an 18-year-old who spent the last 3 or 4 years welding metal and playing with engines than I would hire somebody with a business degree. No question about it. But it's hard to find kids who've been allowed that experience.
Which opens up an interesting possibility. Maybe these 18-year-olds, thin on the ground, might demand a higher wage than all those MBAs coming out of business school. Perhaps this new wave of technology will at last provide opportunities for manual labourers who that first wave of robots put out of work. At least if they know how to program a computer.
I think another thing is that you have to actually learn how to do computer coding if you want to be conversant in the world economy today. And finally, maybe the most important thing is to change our whole attitude to work and the workplace. We're going to have multiple careers, multiple endeavors, multiple skill sets, lifelong education. And the key thing is we all have to be ready and have a willingness to say yes to the change when it touches our lives. I sometimes have, young people come see me and ask whether they should take a job at a big financial institution in the city or in Wall Street where they have security, or should they go to work for a small company? And I'm like, what makes you think you have any security working for a big bank in the city or a big company? Big companies don't provide security. That era is over.
My old man was a good old man, skilled in the molding trade.
New technology has always put people out of work. In a way, that's its point. And it's always caused pain when it does. It hurts to imagine that even part of what we do for work could be done better by a machine. But in the past, technology has always held out the prospect, at least, of some new role in the world of work, a new skill to learn, a new job to do, a new way of earning a living. That doesn't feel so true